Cybersecurity Refined and Feral, where refinement meets chaos in the digital wilderness. We will bring you perspectives from a seasoned professional and another with 5 years of experience. Join us while we discuss the challenges of our profession from multi-generational views with unique mother-daughter conversations.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cybersecurity Refined and Feral. I am Candy Alexander.
And I'm Kaylin Sullivan. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy that you're here to listen to us ramble. Today's topic is going to be about business impact analysis and how businesses can implement them so that they're easier to manage, and the difference between like practical applications and academia's version of how to do a BIA. So for me, a BIA is kind of the foundation of any kind of risk management security program. So if you can't identify your critical systems and your critical processes, you're not going to be able to effectively manage or start a security program. You won't know what you need to protect. It feeds into everything from risk assessments to business continuity planning, incident response, everything. TVM, how can you know what systems need to be remediated if they're critical or not? The reason why I wanted to talk about this was we had to do a BIA at my company, and I was doing all sorts of research, and it's very much a project that can explode out of nowhere. So I had asked my mom for advice on how to kind of keep it within scope and keep it kind of small, because we're a startup. We don't need every single thing, and it doesn't need to be a huge project. It's just enough for us to be able to identify what our critical processes is. So, Mom, what was your advice to me?
Don't overdo it.
Mm.
I think,
which is easy.
Yeah. I think the thing is that people either do or don't do business impact assessments. And the thing is that, in my opinion, it's one of the critical components that you establish your security program on. A lot of people do think it's galactical, that it's just an exercise, kind of like what you're taught in, higher ed or any of the certification programs and whatnot. And that, kind of like algebra, you'll never use it again.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for people to understand the context in which a BIA is important. So you can do a BIA as simple as defining your critical systems, which you mentioned, or you can go out, and the other end of that spectrum is really dig in with the businesses and have the business articulate what is important to them, the impact of a system being unavailable, how much of an impact that would have on the organization, hence business impact assessment, right? So
Yep.
I think far too often, let's start with this conversation. I think too often, especially in my traditional background of working in IT or with IT in security, we always told the business what systems were important, or it was assumed. And I think that that's where it gets lost, is that the business thinks, oh, that's just an IT exercise. But I think fast forward to current day, I think businesses are understanding that they really need to articulate, the value of a critical system and or process that it supports within the organization. And IT should not be making those decisions by themselves. I know, and when you were going through this exercise at your organization, that scope got blown out of portion pretty quickly. In other words, yeah, you wanted to go and talk to the businesses, but like, how deep do you go with the business? At
Yeah.
what point do you say, okay, we're only going to look at the top 5
Yeah.
applications you use, and the rest, that's nice.
Yes. And then at the same time too, it's like the level of detail within those 5. Like I didn't need to document every single thing that those systems and processes were touching. I just need the main points. So it was refining the scope of those identified critical systems as well. Just enough for, okay, well, here's a major component. Yeah, that might have like 7 different systems associated with it, but as long as we know that that is the like one of the main parts of that process, we're aware of it.
Well, so you can take it. So there's 2 ways of looking at things, right? It's kind of like grammar and where you place the comma.
Mm,
Sorry, when you place the comma in a sentence, right? So
yeah.
you can say, okay, I only want the top 3, 5 critical systems to your organization. And like you said, a business can go in the other end of that deep end of the pool and just say, okay, so then it's connected to this, and then John does this, and then Jody comes in and does that, and blah blah blah. So that's important to recognize. That's the critical business process flow, a work
Yes.
stream for our purposes. And I think it's important again to put it in context. A business impact assessment, or a BIA, is really important when you're looking at it from a restoration of systems and services, or it be availability perspective,
Hmm.
or things like that. But the other end of that spectrum is truly from what I'll say a business continuity exercise, where you do need to understand those nuances of what that work stream is. And so the way I used to delineate this in working with either in my own job or for clients is, depending on the context, for again, for the incident response plan or for disaster recovery, I only wanted to go as deep as the systems and technology. However, I would say to the business, you want to map out and define the process. In other words, here's where we get the data from. This is what we do with the data. This is who has access to that. And here's the output. That whole work stream really should be documented if it is critical to the business operations.
Yep. 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 Exactly. And obviously, depending on the size of your company, you can right size it to the size that you need it to be, right? And everything can be taken in steps too. You don't have to do everything all at once.
Right. I think that's a key component too. And this is where I advised you, if you recall, not to get lost in the
Mm,
schematical, step by step and whole, like crazy,
yeah.
process for doing a BIA. That if you've never done one, or if you are a small organization, keep it keep it within reason. Only do perhaps just the systems, identifying the critical systems. And if you do that, again, you need to involve the business, because the other thing is if you don't sit down with the business and interview them and talk with them, that there may be shadow IT systems that they're using. And really, that's when you really uncover and learn a lot, is like, what do you mean you're using Monday for project management? We use, Microsoft products. So what the heck? And by the way, you have business critical projects in Monday, which A, we didn't know about, and B, whose account, who created the account, who's paying for the account, and what the heck is going on with the data that's stored over there.
Hmm. Yeah, and then you can even use that, for consolidation of licenses. So, I mean, it's a project that it like really encompasses everything in the business, which is it was also real fun to my brain broke a couple of times in some of my interviews with my SMEs for each of the departments trying to translate the BIA kind of terminology into their own terminology.
Yes.
There were a couple of times that literally in the meeting and they would be like, "Are you frozen?" And I'm like, "No, my brain's just, I need to think. We're gonna do some mental gymnastics for a minute here." Um, but yeah, it can be very complex, but it is what you make it to be.
So you bring up a good point, because just as with you interviewing the businesses and not understanding their language and terminology, um, it is like speaking a different language, right?
Hmm.
Like French and German, and you're neither, right? And
Hmm.
so I think it's important to empathize
Yeah.
now that we do it as technologists all the time to the business, and that's why when we go to have conversations with the business, they kind of run down the hallway away from us. It's like, I don't want to talk to them, because they feel like incompetent, and that's
Yeah.
so I think, you really raise a good point when you're interviewing and talking with the business, that you keep driving questions to get to that common understanding and or language. Don't
Yes.
walk into a meeting thinking, "Oh, I know exactly what they're going to say," or vice versa. Make sure when you see the business with the deer in the headlight look that you say, "Can I rephrase that? Do you want me to rephrase
Mhm.
that?" or whatever. I think as well, that's why, now that I'm saying it and thinking about it, I think that's why I use a lot of analogies.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And the departmental specific analogies is what I was using too. Um, I forget some exactly, so I did it a while ago. Um, but like, for example, like in finance, you have an invoice come at, like, use their kind of terminology and their metaphors that are kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say common sense, but maybe they are, maybe they aren't for people, I don't know. Um, but yeah. Are there any other, are you ever too small to do a BIA, you think?
No, not unless you only use like one system. I really want to meet that company. I want to hear about that, like one, and that's it, because even at that, like, say for example, like business organization says, "Oh yeah, well, we're a Microsoft shop, that's all we use all Microsoft's products, their CRM, their Word, I mean their Office products, CRM, we use Project, Visio, blah 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 blah." Well, that's all fine and well, but still need to understand what products within that Microsoft suite are important for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's always advantageous to have this exercise. And yeah, I want to reverse the question back to you. Let's talk a moment as to what prompted you to identify the need for doing a BIA. Sorry.
So initially, I had learned from my last company, where I was on the TVM team, that a BIA hadn't ever been done. So, uh, griping about that, not being able to, prioritize patches and remediation, um, and then learning from that, coming into my new role, I wanted to do it so that we had a better visibility and insight into what it is that we actually need to protect. Didn't have much time in the beginning to really implement it and go through with the actual project itself, but then eventually there was a customer ask about it, and that was my
Catalyst.
excuse to be like, "Hey, let's do this. Yeah, that's a great idea."
Right.
Yeah. So I feel
And
like a lot of it could be driven by customer expectations too.
right. Well, so, you know, when you look at, you know, some of the frameworks, especially if you're going after a SOC 2 or something like that, then
Yes.
absolutely that's one of the checklist items. Speaking of compliance by checklist, right? That they're going to ask for. But I think you hit on it on your response that once you develop a BIA, you understand how valuable it is
Mhm.
as a tool for many different things, such as your disaster recovery, such as your risk management program, such as something as easy and, you know, innocent or not, or something as simple as defining what patches gets installed on what systems
Mhm.
first. Like if you have a 0 day come in and you need to like patch quickly, what systems are you going to patch first? You know,
Yeah.
you're going to do it according to the system criticality. So I think it's really something that it sounds all fancy. It sounds intimidating, and unless you
Mhm.
really start to do one. So a lot of times I won't even refer to it as a BIA. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, I'll just call it a critical systems list. You know,
Yeah.
what's your critical systems list? And when I do that, it can be as something as simple as a spreadsheet, right? That lists
Mhm.
out the systems. And I know lots of people do this, right? So they'll list out their systems. They'll list it by priority to the business and the restoration order,
Mhm.
or other factors to include in that would be the scope of impact into the business, such as a user base. Like if something has like 130 users versus like the finance payroll system, you know, processing end of it is maybe like 4 people, you
Mhm.
know. So, you know, those are other factors for helping, excuse me, to prioritize. And then yet another factor. So if you can imagine like a Rubik's Cube, you keep turning it and it's a different side, different side, different side. Another you know, factor to that criticality determination would be on you know, again, the significant amount, let's use some other terms, right? Of how long can the business go without it, right?
Yep.
So, you know, RTOs, recovery time objective, that needs to be talked about with the business. And again,
Mhm.
you don't have to use all these big fancy words. And actually, the smaller the company, I would advise not to use them. Just say
Mhm.
what I said. How long can the business go without having the system before it really hurts? You know, hurts a
Mhm.
little bit. It's kind of like when you go to the doctor's office and you got that smiley faces 1 to 10,
Yeah.
right? It's like, you know, 10 is they're crying their eyes out, and one is like, okay, you know. So, I mean,
Mhm.
that's kind of like the analogy again to have a conversation. So RTO and RPO, recovery point objective, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so I think changing our language to fit the
Yes.
business, right?
Those in particular were some of the hardest mental gymnastics that I had to do. Um, like putting them in everyday terms or departmental terms, because like they sound kind of similar, but they're actually very different. And quite oftentimes in the later interviews, my actual brain broke when I was trying to find analogies for RPO and RTO.
So what did you use? Share with us.
um, so RTO is like, okay, so if webmail is down, how long, like, would we be, like, how long would we be okay for? And recovery point objective is how much emails do you need in order for you to do your business? How much data or how many emails could you lose
Right, right.
in order to, like, are you going to be able to remember something you did yesterday and replicate that data, or are you going to be able to remember something a week ago? For me it was like 3 hours because I can't even remember what I did yesterday, but
Well, it's kind of like it in the old days, in the old days, you know, like we would only do nightly backups and they would be differentials, right? And so those conversations, and when you put that into context for people, then they kind of understand it more, right? So like back when, when we didn't have the cloud backup, it's kind of like, okay, we only do nightly differential backup. So the difference between day to day. And then we do a full week backup at the end of the week. So that conversation became, can you live with, if the systems went down at 3:00 in the afternoon, can you live with just the restore from last night? Oh, okay, now I get it. Because if it's not okay, if you need real time recovery or
we need
near,
to fix it.
then yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I think those are the conversations again that get lost, or they're not had, right?
Or they're not fully understood. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So people will say, oh, just tell me what critical systems you have. What systems do you have to have access to? And then they leave it at that. But, taking it a step further, kind of to your point, start small and appropriate to the business, like start with, tell me your systems that are critical, and then take it to the next level. It's like, okay, so now let's talk about the, how long can you go without data or access to the system? So system availability, right? And then for our RPO, recovery point objective, if I was to lose a day of backups, or you were to lose 1 day of time, would that be okay? And when you look at it from most business processes, let me rephrase that, business processes, it's going to hurt, but we'll be okay.
Yeah.
Unless you're like a bank or you're doing financial transactions. And now your RPO is like, right? Yeah. So I think that's the context to help people understand those differences, because with that information, you're now able to go back to IT ops and say, listen, don't know if you knew, but their RPO is this, and our backup strategy. And that's another thing. People don't know what a backup strategy is. It's like, it's so our backup strategy, days of old, nightly differentials and weekly fulls, that's not going to work because they need it like hourly. And so guess what? That means you need to revisit your backup strategy to make sure that you have those. Thank goodness we're now in the cloud environment in SaaS. So, you have those failovers and everything else in the cloud regions. Thank goodness.
Yep. Exactly. I just thought of a question, but I forgot it already. Typical.
It'll come back. It'll come.
Maybe.
So I think another thing too, another misconception with this whole conversation, right, is that you only have to do it once,
No. Yeah.
So how often do you do?
We review ours yearly. It's attested to in our SOC 2. Ideally, I think yearly is probably good for us of our size. I don't know if people would there be any reason to do it more often?
I would do the system analysis more frequently, only because of shadow IT that keeps creeping in there. Those darn users and take away their credit cards. I think that needs to happen quarterly, to be honest. And I've done it with my clients, those clients that I'm a fractional CISO for. I would sit down with the IT ops guys and the CTO and say, okay, let's run through this, the list. Oh yeah, we haven't used that system, or we replaced, like the DSR, system, the data subject request system with, such and such. So we can get rid of that one and replace it with this one. So quarterly seems to work with that. And by the way,
but that's also, an asset management list. That's not the BIA in general. That's a portion of it.
I said critical systems list.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, but that's what I mean is the BIA methodology or practice is multi-dimensional and or interdependencies on lots of things.
Yes.
Asset management, license management, right? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say that is like on that spreadsheet. I mean, we'd start like this, and then next thing you know, you're out to row like AA, because we include in that what's the contact if it's a SaaS provider. What's the contact? And it's not that 1-800 number. I'll tell you that right now. It's like who's the account exec on that? Or it also included because a lot of SaaS providers they really are really expensive when you apply MFA. And it's like, so we listed is that MFA because something happens, right? Links back to the IRP.
Yeah.
I'm pulling up that critical systems list and we're going to run through it, which are MFA enabled, enforced, and which aren't, because the ones that aren't, I'm starting to get scared about. And I'm going to check those. And we're going to, divvy up that to-do list of checking those systems and going off and exploring, was this incident impacting that system? And if so, in that little magic spreadsheet I also had who's the business owner, who's my contact. So when Monday goes down, I know to contact, Joe, whatever, and, tell them, hey, it's down, or are you, we have that direct conversation from a user experience and set expectations. So I think that's, that list is the magic cheat sheet.
Yes. And that is as a result of doing a BIA.
Exactly. And again, it doesn't include the nuances and the details of the business process. But more importantly, like I would include, like if there were APIs, again, the critical systems list portion of the BIA, right? So BIA is twofold. It's technology and it's business related. Of course, being technologists, we focused on that, but I would include if that system had, APIs over into another. So there was that interdependency noted.
Yes. Yep. I didn't start with a critical list of systems. I approached and went a step higher and actually defined out what is the most important process that you do in your department and what systems are tied to it. So I took it a step higher to get those interdependencies.
Right. No, when you're talking with the business, that's the conversation. It's never like, tell me what systems you use, because they'll list them
list
all.
Everything. Yes, they did.
So you say, what are the three? I start with 3 to 5, right? What are the top 3 processes in your department that if you didn't do within one day, that is going to have a significant harm to the organization, right? And and then you say, okay, for those processes, what applications do you use to perform that? So that's the conversation with the business. Absolutely.
Yes. And I think I scheduled everybody I talked to. I think it was about an hour. Some of them were 2 hours, depending on how complicated their processes were.
Right.
But it's also like culturally great because you get to connect with everybody across the business and develop, so they can kind of figure out what it is that you're doing. And then you're adding value to their department because they can obviously glean their own information from like the results of the BIA.
Absolutely. And I think, the thing is it's all factors within that business process. So it's not just the systems that you're listing out, but it's also the data type that the system contains, because of course that's going to tell you if there's sensitive data on there, being PII or whatever, consumer data, whatever, line of business in, or sector. But it also helps you understand, and it's the initial steps of the data flow.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, like, and anybody who's listened to me on LinkedIn, I am like a fanatic about the data flows. Right. So, when you look at it, a progressive approach, the first step is the BIA. What are having the conversation, what applications do you use, Mr. Business Owner, and blah, blah, blah. So again, we focus on technology. The business talks about, like, John, Sally, Mac, and so they do the process, and they need to own that process, right? Because that will feed into the business continuity plan,
Mm-hmm.
where we worry about the systems, but at the intersection of those two is the data. How do you get your data? What do you do with the data? Where do you store the data? And where do you put the data out to?
Who
So,
has access to the data?
right. Yep.
Yep.
So I think, when you look at it from a maturity progression,
Mm-hmm.
that's how I would see it, versus the critical systems list. Then it's the business processes. And then lastly, it's the data. So when you put those three together, you have like a very comprehensive view into your environment.
Yeah, the academia template that I had found even goes into like employee count. Like, how many people does it take to run this process? Can you survive with one person, or do you need 2 to 3? So, and like, it will go as deep as you want it to go too. I think
Mm-hmm.
us talking about it this way, though, really kind of puts it into perspective that it actually is something that somebody can achieve at a small business. It's just, you can't eat a elephant in one bite, right? Is that how it goes?
Yep.
Um, but yeah, I am a huge proponent of doing a BIA.
That's
You get so much valuable information out of it, and it is what you make it to be. Um, I still have so many different roads I want to go down with the RBIA, just to leverage it and make it, mature our security program even more. Our security program for our size is really good. It's quite comprehensive.
So I think you mentioned that the scholastical approach is to even go as far as identifying, how many resources are required to take care of the process and blah blah blah. I think when you get to that end of the maturity spectrum, if you will, that's when you need a full blown business continuity plan. And let's face it, today. Um, it's not what it used to be, because we are in the cloud now for
Mm-hmm.
the most part. And I think it also depends. You'll never get rid of the natural disaster perspective. And so that's why even business continuity plans are rather important.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we look at the fundamental documents, or the fundamental, shall I say, components of a security program, the BIA, or, the critical systems list, is really foundational. Let's take the angle again, explore just for a moment the contributions that it makes into a risk management program, right?
Yep. Yep. Once you can identify those critical systems and processes, then you can formulate more informed risk registers around them as well. So, like, if Amazon was to fall into the ocean, what's the risk of that? What's the likelihood? What's the consequences of that? For us, it would just be like, okay, half the internet's down, so I guess we're out of business.
Right. But even from a more practical perspective, if, for example, you have a unique application used by, say, for example, the finance group, right? And it's absolutely critical for the business, um, for the availability of that application. And for whatever reason, if that were to go down, you would know, or if there was a patch, right? So, like, as security professionals, we're always keeping an eye out on, the CISA announcements, or the CERT advisories and all that. So, like, when you see one come through and it's for, I don't know, pick your favorite finance package, you're going to know you need to patch that really quickly or whatever. So I think that is a really important component. And just in speaking on that, though, it makes me also realize that it's not just business systems, right? So when we use the business impact assessment for the total environment, it even includes infrastructure, right? I on a client engagement, and they had a certain firewall and VPN client that there was quite a few patches put out there. So obviously, got to know that, got to know right down to the version level too. So you quickly start with a simple, little spreadsheet of, we use X, Y, and Z. And before you know it, you're adding, and this is another example, you're adding more and more columns, like what version is it? Because a lot of these things are version specific, and it feeds right into being a data source for your risk management program. It's like, okay, well, even I know some organizations use multiple VPN clients, if you will. So, you go and look, a patch came out for such and such VPN. You go to your little magic cheat sheet, and you see, oh, there's only 3 users that are using that VPN. So we don't have to drop everything, or from a resource utilization perspective, we can have, Susie go out and, apply those 3 patches, not a big deal. Or, oh my goodness, there's like 97 users using that client. We need, 3 people assigned to go and work those patches. So that's how it really works as well, from feeding into the risk management process, risk mitigation, right?
Yeah. Yep. Would you say that a BIA is a foundation of a risk management program, or or is it a component?
It's a data source.
Yeah.
It is foundational because it's asset management, right? It's so many things. So it is foundational, because if you don't have that, then you have to go and figure that out. I have to go and figure out, like, okay, do we have, like, if I didn't have a BIA on hand, I would have to go to IT ops. Do we have this application in our environment? Okay. Do we have that version number? Okay. How many users? Okay. So that doesn't even come, right at the top of their minds either. They have to go and research that. So when you go and respond to threats and vulnerabilities, time is of the essence. So if you're not able, so you just, heard the 3 different sources that I'd be asking for. And if you have to go and look them up or look for the latest scan report, right? That's going to take time. Whereas if I had the little magic sheet and I have that information, then it's like, go patch those 3 systems, or go patch those 97 systems, devices. So time is of the essence. And so again, yeah, it's a huge component or foundational factor to a risk for the whole security program, actually.
Yeah. If your company had just like all of these different components all over the place, like scattered about, does that still count or does it need to be a formalized program exercise?
That's an interesting question, right? So I think it depends on the company and the maturity aspect, where they are with their security posture. And I'm sorry, I'll apologize right now. I do not mean to say maturity aspect. It's adoption, the rate of,
Oh.
okay, because I mean, in all fairness, right? So, so I think it's the level of adoption that one would have on a BIA, and it's really dependent on the need. So, it could be a simple little spreadsheet with the 4 systems, or
Mm-hmm.
it could be, this multi-dimensional Rubik's cube.
Yeah.
They're all BIAs, business impact assessments. And that's why I don't know if I even really like that terminology, because a business impact assessment is like,
It's analysis.
it's one thread to the whole.
I thought it was analysis. Is it not?
Oh, assessment and analysis are kind of like the same thing.
All right. One more question for you. Is this a document that we should be sharing with customers
No.
and external parties?
Are you serious?
Why?
Because it contains very sensitive information. As a threat actor, I now know what to hit, where your golden eggs are. So absolutely, positively not. The answer, do you have one? Absolutely.
Yep.
And maybe, kind of fuzzy it out and send a snapshot of it, but I would never, send the detailed BIA to anyone.
Yep. Agreed. Internal only.
Confidential, yeah, absolutely, proprietary.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sensitive, absolutely.
For my eyes only. My eyes only.
Wow, I don't know if I go that far, but yeah, no, that's but so here's the other thing too, because I was on a client account engagement where we were working on a SOC 2 readiness, and so it depends. It depends. I mean, these controls are always interpretive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the formal scholastical, business impact analysis, assessment, whatever, that is very much according to, that framework. So like theirs was very, I hate to say it, it was useful, but not as useful as what we're talking. And that comes back to what's the difference of having a checklist versus really doing it, right?
Yeah.
And so that, again, another twist here is, what is the intention of the control? Is the intention of the control to have a piece of paper to be able to demonstrate, well, yeah, we have identified our really important systems?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the intention of the control to use that as a tool, as we've described all the benefactors of using it in this conversation already? Your risk management, your ability to understand the impact for IRP exercise or restoration purposes, and so on and so forth, understanding who the contacts are in the event of emergency, and so on and so forth. So again, what's the intent? Is the business really all they really care about is getting that SOC 2? Then great, then do up your little BIA for that, because you kind of have to do it to what that assessor or auditor is going to be looking for. But then you have a working one over here. And maybe that's the answer, Kaylin, to, do you share it with your clients or not? I would never share my working one, but I might, here's what we showed. Because like even the it's very much so. The BIA used for this SOC 2 is like really high level, and it's like not useful.
Yeah.
It was so high level it wasn't useful, from a practicality perspective. So that I might under NDA, right? Non-disclosure agreement, perhaps It all depends on how serious closing the sales deal or not. But I would be very careful. I wouldn't share that working document.
Yeah. 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 I will say that prior to us doing the actual formal BIA, we had components that were all over the place. So kind of piecing all of those together and formalizing it
Yeah.
was quite a fun project, as mentally exhausting as it was. It was well worth all of the effort.
So who uses the BIA besides you?
Besides me, finance, the exec team, there were findings that came out of it, recommendations. So then that goes to engineering if it's engineering work. Um,
So what do you mean findings? Give me, for example, if you can.
so like a finding would be this is completely made up. Um, like, oh, we don't have a firewall. So one of the findings would be like, this is, a high risk process. You should really have this behind a firewall. I suggest that you you implement a firewall because it supports these 25 critical business functions. So
So
that would be a
that
finding.
so that actually is a risk
A risk.
assessment and risk
Hmm.
mitigation. So
Hmm.
again, by performing the business impact assessment analysis, then you're able to identify the risks and therefore track and mitigate.
Yep.
Right. Right.
And those
Yeah.
are the things that go on the risk register.
Yep.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about in regards to a BIA? Because I think we've hit like a lot of points here.
I don't think so.
All right. I think that was a really good conversation. I hope our watchers, listeners would agree. Would love to hear their thoughts. Again, we hope that you found this conversation was insightful into the practical application of a BIA and all those other things, RTOs, RPOs, and all those other geeky acronyms that we like to toss around. So if you would like, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How do you use a BIA and or that approach? If you could share your thoughts in the comments below, give us a like on LinkedIn, and more importantly, subscribe to our YouTube channel, which we have all of our videos up there, episodes. And by the way, I might like to offer that they are timeless. These are all relatively timeless conversations and topics that we hit on. There's nothing that would be applicable 10 years ago or 10 years in the future from now. So, whenever you stumble across our episodes or videos, take a watch, give us a comment or two. We'll definitely love to see them. And with that, I'm going to say until next time, stay secure, stay refined.
And don't be afraid to get a little bit feral.
Great. Thank you, everyone.